Chapter 20. March is for remembering. March, the old man said, is a fine month for remembering. I suppose it's because there's really nothing else you can do in it. Don't ever let anybody tell you that getting old happens in the autumn of your life. It happens in March. The old man and I were just sitting on a day you wouldn't want to give way to your worst enemy. The wind was blowing fit to split your teeth so that your skin felt like it was currycombed every time you walked out of doors. A few flowers had poked their heads up, and then a new frost nobody'd counted on arrived, and the flowers ducked their heads right back in again. It was just a touch too early for the geese to be flying north. Everything was finished, the quail season was over, and the fishing hadn't started, and in those days there wasn't any television. I got up and started to pace, like a nervous cat when it's raining outside. The old man watched me walk a bit, and then he sort of giggled under his mustache. He liked it right where he was. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to walk. He wasn't headed anywhere. Offhand, he said, I'd surmise there ain't nothing wrong with you that calomel can't cure. But if you'll settle down a minute, I'll read you a short sermon. It's this. Nobody ever got any younger, because if they had, I would have heard of it, and maybe bought some. So what a man has to do is take a little time off as he grows older and devote the waste of space to remembering the things he did that he maybe won't never do again. That's how you get your muscles back. It's also a fine preventative against the nervous indigestion, and when you get tired of thinking about all you've done, you can always use the time thinking about what you'd like to do in the future. You done anything lately you admired? I said, yes, sir, several things. Well, boy, the old man suggested, suppose you sort of rehash 'em in your head and then tell me what it was like to do 'em. Just for instance, he said. I bet you that you won't remember much of the little stuff. Suppose you start with those 4 geese you shot that day you came home full of the brags. There had never been a day like the day I shot the 4 geese and came home full of the brags. I had had an accidental day with the 15 quail on 9 shots, but accidents don't count. Everybody touches perfection once, and I touched it that day, and I knew I had it in my hand. But I hadn't tried to appraise it. I just knew I had it. It happened like this. I was down in the east end of the state with some friends down around Hatteras, and it was a fine big year for the old Canada honkers. By fine, I mean nobody was shooting very many, because they would sit out there on the wide water until the shooting time was finished, and then they'd fly into the cornfields to feed. They must have been operating by stopwatch, because you could hear 'em holler when the legal shooting was done, and then they'd come in to feed as tame as chickens. Not having much else to do, I kept betting that someday they were going to get their time check signals fouled, and some of those geese would flock in off the big water a bit early, and I'd be there when they came. So I made me a nest in a ditch in the cornfield and waited 'em out with 2 shotguns, both 12s and both doubles. I didn't want to be undergunned when they decided to arrive an hour early. I had both guns loaded with number 1 bucks. In my youthful enthusiasm, I reckoned that if number 1s were big enough for a deer, they were big enough for a goose, and if you could hit a goose with them. Every day I went and sat in my little hidey hole in the corn shucks. Every day the geese came in just after the curfew. Every day I got up and went off with the 2 guns. The reason I didn't cheat was fairly simple. The old man said that if I ever had any trouble with the game wardens, he was going to be on the side of the game wardens, and I could stay in jail and rot for all he cared. He said game laws were made on purpose so that you'd have some game to shoot next year. There was the day I changed the loads and shot a crow at a great distance because they weren't going to be any geese, and I was bored. I shot him with an old 30-incher double, full choked, and he dropped like a stone at about 60 yards. There was another day I shot some doves because the geese were still in a high V and talking not seriously about dinner. But finally I learned the value of patience and just sat there without shooting. I reckoned the geese would come someday, and they would be more apt to come if I didn't loose off at crows and doves. It was late in the fall, and the corn shucks were stained brown by frost, the crisp yellow leaves striped like streaks of nicotine. There's still a lot of yellow nubbin ears on the crazy bending stalks with the dried out dark brown whiskers at the top of the ears and a husk split to show the seed inside. It was lonesome, like it can get to be lonesome in a cornfield, because there's nothing I know of as shambly and dilapidated as an old cornfield. But there was still food aplenty, and the honkers knew it. They wouldn't leave it until they finished it, and they hadn't even begun to finish it. A late autumn day is a wonderful thing all by itself, because in hog killing time the sun is bloody red from the wood smoke of the fire that's always going on somewhere. The ground gets gray and cold and hard in the late afternoon, and you find that your fingers stiffen from about 3:30 until you go home to the fire. All the lonesome sounds start earlier in the late fall, the scattered quail trying to call each other back into a covey, a cow lowing sad and hopeless away over yonder. Even a crow's caw sounded wistful instead of ornery. And then you have the goose sound. It isn't a gabble. It wasn't really a honk. It just sounds like a goose, and it'll never sound like anything else as the old gander lifts his gaggle off the lake or off the sound and issues the correct instructions about where his herd is headed. A goose in the air is music. It is sad music when you know the goose is not apt to light, and beautiful music when he makes that big landing circle and stops his wings, holding them slanted in the cold, clean air, losing altitude and gliding down in a decreasing flight pattern until he drops his legs and bumps into a rocky landing. The thing about a goose is he's a keen looker. He'll drop that snaky neck and shove his head down and check the terrain before he does anything at all about it. That is when you don't move an eyeball, not when a goose is looking. Yet he is stupid in one way. When I got a lot older, I shot blue geese in Louisiana, and they would even come into a bad call if they were young enough and had lost mama. They'd also come in to a sheet of newspaper stuck on a stick or a dead cousin propped up on the ground. But this one day I had in mind, the geese left the water early. I held still in my cramped little hideout in the ditch and looked at the 3 big landing circles without getting nervous and without shooting too soon. I didn't move the barest part of a muscle, and when the old 15-pounder decided it was safe to land, he said a word to the flock and they dropped in low. I shot 2 coming, I dropped 1 gun and picked up the other and shot 2 going. Possibly I never saw anything in my life like 4 geese, all seemingly dropped at once. They fell like shot down aircraft and hit the deck with a thump like a bomb. Only one was wounded, the last one, and I shoved a fresh load into the gun I was holding and held the bead on his head, and he quit leaving the premises. The indignation in the sky was considerable. When the old gander came plummeting down and the other 3 fell out of the flock, there was a flat accusation of betrayal, and the survivors pushed on south, complaining bitterly as they flew. I couldn't begin to describe the emotions. When you've got 4 dead Canada geese on the ground at once, and you don't know which one to pick up first, I ran from one to another like a nervous old lady, and then I decided I would just pick up the geese as I found them, starting with the first 2 that I shot coming and winding up with the last one that I had to give the finisher to. To me, a coat with 10 quail in it is still a big event, but 4 Canada geese, 4 old ringnecks is a feast, is a fortune, is a truckload of trophy. I cannot say how small a boy carried 2 big 12-bore shotguns and 4 mature honkers, but I managed. I think maybe I could have flown the load home with one hand. To pluck a goose takes time, especially if you want the dry down to stuff a pillow with. To pluck 4 takes a lot of time, but somehow it was time I didn't mind spending. The old boss gander was tougher than whit leather, but I ate him happily. The others tasted not much better. The guns, I thought, added new dignity, because I had never met anybody who had killed 4 Canada geese in one salvo. I felt like a man who would never again shoot less than 4 Canada geese. This is what I tried to tell the old man. It was as if I had shot 4 elephants, I said. I never had such a big day in all my life, and with the exception of the one when we got the singles scattered that time, and the old man held up his hand and pushed it gently towards me. No, he interrupted. Don't remember any more today, or people will say you're a bore. You had enough remembering with the geese. You got to save some remembering for the next rainy day in March. But tell me one thing. What stood out the clearest about that day? The day, I answered before I thought. All of it. There really wasn't anything bigger in it than all the little things in it. I felt lucky when I started it, sitting in the ditch in the cornfield, and I kind of knew that this was one day for the geese to come in, and I knew it. That was the only big thing. I knew it was going to be the right day for it. Well, the old man warned, remember one thing when you start remembering again. Remember that there ain't anything in one day any bigger than all the things that go to make up the day. This will give you considerable comfort when you're as old as me. Do you understand what I'm driving at? Yes, sir, I said, because this was getting too deep for me. I sure do. I sure didn't, actually. I just wanted to get off the platform. But now today I do. I remember very carefully, even a war, and there isn't any one event in any day I remember that was bigger than what I had for breakfast.